Bow hunters, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Becoming a Bow Hunter. Today, I'm going to give you guys a little Rut recap. And so this is for the 2023 Rut, Red Deer Rut. I've just got back. I spent a week out there. Had an absolutely incredible time. So many cool close encounters. And I learned a lot. And right now, in this point in time, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to get back out, which is a little bit soul crushing, but that is all right. I would love to get back out just like another day or two, if possible, but we've just got a lot going on, moving house. Got a few big life events like 40th and stuff like that I need to attend. And it's all in this time right when the damn rut is on. So it's just the way it's played out, and that's fine. I'm at peace with what has happened, and I'm going to hopefully share some of the stories with you guys today, and hopefully you enjoy them and maybe even get some learnings from them as well, like I did. To start with, I think it's probably pretty important to kind of introduce a few of the members of my story. So first of all, we've got Scotty, which is my brother-in-law, who came down for his first ever hunt with me. So he drove from Mackay to come and hang out. And we spent the first few days of my week off to get into the deer. And then there is Cecil, my 6x7, which is the name that I gave one of the deer. There's also Frank the Tank, and they're kind of the main. Frank the Tank is like the beast. He was the big boy that I was really chasing quite a lot when the winds were letting me. And so I'm going to kind of talk about those two in particular quite a lot. But it was pretty cool to have Scotty along, someone who I believe has never even really been hunting. I didn't even ask him the question of if he'd ever shot like a rabbit or anything like that before. I know that he's got his own rifle. He's been playing around with it, shooting it. And so I was like, hey, he's shot before. This is going to be good. Like, I'll get a rifle. So I borrowed my mate's 308. We took it out, and the plan was to go out and get him a deer down within hopefully the first few days, and then spend the rest of the time bow hunting. I don't know if it's partially my fault or not, but in the sense that I asked Scotty what he wanted to start with. And I said, do you mind what sort of deer you have? Like, do you want a hind, or do you want a stag? What do you like to take down? And he said, look, I really am not fussed at all. Given the time of year, I was like, well, it's the ideal time to target the males in particular. Go after a stag of some caliber, because realistically, it's probably going to be one of the best times to be able to do that, but also in regards to like herd generation and I think population of great deer moving forward, it's probably the best time to take out one of them rather than one of the breeding females. So our plan was to go out and get him a deer that was of somewhat pretty good caliber. And so we got out. The very first day, we kind of went out into this back hill, which is the house hill. And we got to the top of the hill, and there was a few deer roaring. There was probably about 4 or 5 going off. And at the bottom of the hill, there was a young boy. And to the side of us, but unfortunately where the winds were going, there was a very like low grown, like really not much to it as such. And in regards to listening back to what Kevy Shilford said on the Finding the Big Boys podcast that I did with him, that would have been in my head the ideal big boy to go and have a look at. And it's funny, talking to my uncle later on, he said, I've actually seen a monster stag up there. And so as a crow flies, I don't know, it might be like, yeah, I don't know. You can see it, like you can see the top of the hill from their sheds. And he's like, yeah, I've seen him up there before. Like I've seen a stonker up there before. He stands there and he's got a big old set of headgear. And you can make it out from the sheds, which is pretty impressive. I kind of think he would be another Frank the Tank caliber stag. However, throughout the whole journey, I never actually laid eyes on him, because that was pretty much the first day we went up there. It played out, and it didn't come to fruition that we really got to see any deer. We bumped a spiker and we saw a few hinds, but that was kind of it. But the winds just kind of were swirling like crazy. And what happened is they were doing all of their weaning of cattle. They were moving all of their cows around in their front home block. They've got a lot of blocks there that they utilize, but everything was in the front blocks. So essentially on day 2 or day 3 of us being there, they moved everything into that back block and just those surrounding blocks. And this is usually really good deer country, but unfortunately it just meant that we did go back up there. And when we went back up there, there was just nothing. Like they had just moved off. Having cattle in that paddock had just scared them away enough. So yeah, it was just the case that we pretty much had to bow out and not use that part of the block anyway. So a lot of the time then was spent kind of down the back. And so the next morning after we'd had that first level of excitement, Russ, we got out the back and we parked the car up, and you kind of have to drive midway down the block before you get to where the deer are. And there's this awesome ridge that sits along the front side of the block. And I'm sure there would be deer in there. Like it's great looking deer country, but it's not a part of the country that I have actually spent a lot of time in yet. I've walked it before, but I've never actually spent bulk amount of time in there. So it is something that I do want to do, because with last year, I don't know if you remember, they kind of sold the back third of the block. And that was really great country for hunting deer. It was where I got my stag last year. So it kind of means that I've lost big access to the block that I had. And this front half of the block, there wasn't any rules going on up there, at least not when we parked up. Now we were a little way away from where that ridge kind of joins on. But that ridge joins onto a bowl, which joins onto another ridge that all kind of sidescapes the country. And pretty much I could hear things going off in the bowl. I could hear things going off in the back end of the ridge, but I couldn't hear anything going off on that front end of the ridge. And so I actually kind of think there's not a lot of deer population there just yet. Maybe they go there sometimes, I'm not sure. But it is something that I'm going to explore a little bit more. Now, on the opposing side, the opposite face, so there's a good couple 100 meters in between, like of fields, but on the opposing side, to another ridge. And so in the bowl, essentially, is where we could hear where Frank the Tank was. And on the opposing ridge, which I'm going to call the Wattle Hill, because there's 1,000 wattle trees been knocked over just recently. They've done a whole heap of clearing. And essentially, they've knocked over all the wattle trees and not had them dozed over yet. So it's all just like, it is absolute hell. Like trying to crawl, no, not even crawl, trying to walk through that and be quiet. Like it is such a hard thing to do. And that's where Cecil and his group were. And so the first morning, based on where the winds were and based on where we had parked, we were like, well, we're going to go over towards that Wattle Hill. And essentially, we made our way through and we were going through reasonably open country just as the sun was rising. We hadn't quite got to the ridge yet, and it kind of worked out perfectly, because as I was walking across that little bit of a ridge that goes into the face that they were on, I could see a big old red deer bum looking out at me. And so I stopped and I was like, just hold up here, Scotty, we need to have a look at this. And so we had a bit of a look, and I'm like, no, there's definitely a deer there. Big body deer. I couldn't really make out his antlers or anything like that. And then we kind of just sat down in some shrubbery, probably about realistically 260 meters or so from where the deer were on this face, and just started glassing. It turned out there was like 6 or 7 hinds there, and then this big spiker. And I say big because he was like ridiculous body shape. And I said to Scotty, like, we're not touching him because he's going to be a great deer when he's older. And during that, we could hear another deer on the other side going crazy. So I guess to kind of explain Wattle Hill, there's one long ridge on one side of it, and on the other side, there's like a bowl, and a joining onto the ridge. So it's kind of like 2 big bowls, and then it connects onto the other ridge that we're looking at right now. So pretty much in the first bowl is Cecil our 6x7. He's running around going crazy on the other side, like just letting them off. And the interesting thing was that all the girls were on this side, and you could hear that he was close. He didn't really care too much, I think, because he was just too busy having the roaring battles with the opposing ridge. And it was pretty cool to kind of hear. I think there would have been like 3 or 4 stags along that ridge, plus then Frank the Tank going off in his bowl on that side, and then there's Cecil on this side going absolutely insane. And then the Wattle Hill, essentially, there's a big valley between it, and it goes onto the back ridges that we've now lost access to. But then there's another like 3 or 4 stags going crazy down there. So it's just such a cool environment to kind of be able to take, especially someone who's never been a part of a rut before, to be able to take them into that and just be like, listen to the glory. Like it's just such an incredible thing, I think. And it's I don't know, hearing red deer during the rut, and I haven't had the experience of hearing fallow croaking yet, but hearing them roaring is just cool. It just sends like shivers down my spine every time. You know, like when you hear an incredible song and it gives you goosebumps. That's kind of what I get when I hear the red deer roaring. So yeah, we're kind of sitting there watching these deer for a while, and then all of a sudden Cecil pops his head over over the ridge. He runs in, he just just a big old roar, and then runs back off. And he did that like 2 or 3 times. And when he came over at one point, he was pretty much next to that spiker. And at first, when I very first saw Cecil, I saw him next to the spiker, and I was like, you know what? He's actually, because I compared him in body shape to the spiker, I was like, that he's not that impressive. Like he's probably a younger male. He's got a great headset, but he's probably a younger male. What I later learned was that just that spiker, like, I'm going to be incredibly intrigued to see what he looks like next year and maybe even the years to come, because I think he's just going to be an absolute like monstrosity of a deer. Yeah, he's got some incredible genetics, and to be that big a body to start with. And I even messaged a few people like, oh my God, I just saw like the biggest spiker I've ever seen. And this thing is like a horse compared to the other deer. He just kind of towered over them. So when I compared him to Cecil, the spiker to Cecil, I was kind of like, oh, he's just a young deer with a great headset on him. We'll let him go for a few years. But then we went to have a closer look anyway. So we got pretty close up. And to start with, I thought Cecil was a little 6x6. And so I called him Cecil, my 6x6 to start off with. And that was kind of going to be a comeback to deer if we wanted to. And essentially a few things played out. We got close-ish, but not as close as what we probably should have that morning. And realistically, the first part of the week is kind of a little bit blur to me right now. But to put it straight, pretty much we ended up finding Frank the Tank in that first chunk of the week. We also came across the other deer. There's a few younger stags on the ridge, the same ridge that Frank the Tank was on. But one of the major things happened is one morning early, we got in and we were walking down the fence line, and we were coming straight onto a roaring stag. Like he would be within 200 meters of us, and we're just walking along this fence line trying to be as quiet as possible, completely pitch black. The sun hadn't rised yet, and so we were just kind of walking along to try get as close as possible, so when daylight came, that we would have a shot, ideally that Scotty would have a shot on the stag. And so we started walking on in, and there's like the grass in this block, in this paddock in particular, was so high, like pretty much belly button height. You're walking through it and it's just ridiculous. You couldn't really kind of make out anything as you're walking. You're just making like the bristles as you're walking through, making the noises. And so we got far into it and along the fence line, and then all of a sudden we got barked at, and I could just kind of see, once the bark happened, there was a mob of hinds literally just in front of us where the grass kind of stopped. It kind of dropped off and into more of a flat paddock style thing. And there was like a mob of hinds there, and they're just looking at us barking. I was like, oh my God. So I just got us to sit down for a bit, and eventually they kind of ran off. But then the stag that was there was like, well, I'm going for a closer look. And he came up and he's just sitting there. He would have been 60 meters, maybe if even 60 meters off of us, just like staunching us, like, who are you? It was pretty interesting to see. And I'm like trying to get Scotty to see it, but he had this little shrub in front of him he couldn't see. So I was like, climb through the fence so you can rest on the pole. And it wasn't working out, unfortunately. And eventually the stag kind of ran off. So by that time, the sun started to come up. So I was like, okay, we're going to make some moves here. So I started making some calls. We started walking on in, and they're just, he was there. He was like very close to us the whole time. I'm like, we're going to come into this little clearing part up here, and he's going to be up there. And he was actually much closer than I thought he was going to be. And we got into this part, and I said to Scotty, like, wherever we get to, you're going to rest on something. Like, make sure you've got a rest for the gun. So you're either holding your hand up against a tree, or you're positioning it in like the Y of a tree. If you can lay down and get prone, we'll get into that position. Like whatever you can do to make it the shot as easy as possible for you, so you're not having to shake and hold the gun and take the shot like that. And we got to this point, and this stag, the hinds saw us first, and they kind of ran off real quick, and he once again staunched us. He's like, I'm going to show you. Who are you? Came down to us. It was 80 meters off. And so I had time to range him. Like, he's 80 meters, get comfortable, take your shot. And Scotty took his shot, boom. And that deer's just standing there. I was like, clear miss, go again. And I'm sure by this stage, the adrenaline was just absolutely pumping for Scotty. So he's taking his next shot, boom, and just nothing. The deer's like walks off. And that was a bit heartbreaking because I think that was like morning 3. So we'd already spent a fair bit of time kind of maneuvering about and getting close on deer. And it just hadn't quite come together yet. And I knew that was going to be the case, right? Like going out hunting, it never goes as easy to plan as possible. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. But especially when you're taking a brand newbie out, I knew there was going to be some teething steps to it. And I was just excited that we were going to be able to get him out and get him onto a deer eventually was the plan. And I knew it was going to happen. But when that did happen, it made me go, okay, we need to actually take a step back here and really go and spend some time just working on shooting. Like realistically, it was probably a little bit irresponsible of me to take Scotty out and take him out with a rifle he'd never shot before. I got him to do some dry firing, so we were practicing that, but then we'd never actually shot it. And I think realistically, the worry of what the recoil was going to do was what was making like the shot go up. I think that's pretty much essentially what was happening, that he was panicking about what was happening and pulling the gun up. And so we went and did a heap of shot practice that afternoon. We shot his 22, like, oh my gosh, I think we shot like 160 odd bullets or something through it. And then we had a fair few shots through the 308 as well, just to kind of get used to that recoil. We had shots all the way out to, I think like 220 meters, something like that. So I was like, look, just get confident and comfortable with the shot process. I watched him and he was actually punching the trigger a bit. So really just pulling that finger to get the shot off. And so we kind of trained through the same method as what I went through before I went into the rut this year, going through the pulling of the arm, rather like hooking the finger and pulling back slowly as a squeeze rather than pulling the whole finger. And I don't know if that's necessarily correct for rifle shooting or not, but it really controlled his movement a lot more and made the shot a way better shot process. And so with that, then I was feeling a lot more confident. He was feeling a lot more confident. So it was kind of going down to the wire to go and find a deer for him. Now, where we did our shooting, unfortunately, was right next to where Frank the Tank was. So we kind of had to leave that area for a day pretty much before we went back out there. And the winds finally gave us a chance to kind of go in and trial that side. And we got to the parking spot, I'll call it, where we pull up every morning and listen for some deer. And we hopped out and it was pretty quiet for about 5 minutes or so. So I let out a roar, and then Frank the Tank goes off in that big bowl. So I'm like, okay, that's where we're going today. The winds are perfect. So we drove around to get into the entrance of the bowl. We walked our way into the bowl, and Frank, as soon as I let off that roar, he just didn't stop. He went and he went and he went and he went. He just kept going. I was like, this is sick. Like, this guy is so active this morning. It was cool to kind of hear. Mm-hmm. And so we started making our way in, and we pulled up. I was like, we're going to get in as close as we can, or close-ish, and then I'm going to let off a holly behind calls, and we'll try to get Frank the Tank to come in close. And actually, to recap on what we'd done with Cecil, I'd done the exact same thing. Heap of hind calls and nothing worked because he had so many hinds with him. So I got to this point and pretty much I was like, okay, you set up and get a good location. Just one request: if it's a great deer, like I'll give you the go ahead, but if it's a great deer, I'd like to take a shot if that's right. He's like, yeah, there's no problems at all. And so we set up and we started calling, and Frankie boy was just screaming back at us. Like, he wouldn't come closer. We tried for a good probably 20 minutes and he just wouldn't move. He was just happy where he was. So I'm like, okay, we're going to get closer. So we walked our way through and there was this big, thick space. I'm like, he's probably going to be just on the other side of this thick space. So we got through there and he wasn't there. So I'm like, okay, he's going to be within this open range here somewhere. Let's set up again and we'll do some more calls. So we set up again, did some more calls, and he was just in like the base of this valley, just over from us, like up against the edge of the bowl, essentially. And I was like, I literally tried for like another, I reckon it must have been 10 to 15 minutes just trying to call Frankie, and he just wouldn't come. I'm like, what is going on with this guy? I was like, surely I thought that he would make his way across, but it just didn't happen. So I'm like, we're just gonna have to go in for a closer look, Scotty. So we pretty much grabbed our gear and I'm like, just stay really close to me, move when I move, don't move when I'm not moving. Like, let's just keep it quiet as possible. And each morning it was really good because there was so much dew about that it made the ground so moist that you could actually walk through it without like all the crunching, which makes such a difference because we'd go into that same part of the block in the afternoons. And every step was like painfully crunchy, like to the extent where you're like, oh my gosh, everything in this valley is going to hear what I'm doing. So it was nice to have that on our side each morning. So we started walking on in, and we got pretty close. And then all these hinds started moving off, and I counted 4 to start with. I'm like, oh my god, there's 4 hinds. That makes sense as to why he wasn't coming to us. And then all of a sudden, 2 more hinds go out. I'm like, oh, there's 6 hinds. Like, that makes a lot more sense. And then all of a sudden we saw Frankie, and that's when I fell in love. He was a big boy. And really, when I say big boy, it's kind of, in my head, it's like without like ridiculous amounts of tops like you see over in New Zealand or something maybe, but like in regards to like a proper red deer, great genetics, just a great looking deer. That is the type of deer that I see. I'm like, wow, that's a great red stag. And so it's kind of like the picture of, if you Google red stag, it's probably the picture you'll kind of see. It was like a deer like Frank the Tank. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's amazing. And the most frustrating thing of the whole week is this morning in particular was the morning that my auntie and uncle had specifically asked if I could go back and help them with the roofing. They were getting a new shed put up, and they asked if I could go back and put the shed on. The guys who were erecting the shed essentially said, look, we've usually got 4 people that help us with this, and we're going to need some help at 6:30 in the morning. Can you make sure you're back? And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? But because of the situation and allow me to hunt on the place and whatever else, like, of course I'm going to go and help them out. And oh my God, like, yeah. So I got back to the house. I pretty much got to that point and I said, Scott, look, what I'm going to do is put you on the dam. With where they were going, it sounded like they were going to kind of make their way back down to the dam. I'm like, you might get a view on, you might get a shot. Like, yeah, if you get a shot at him, go for it. Like, do what you need to get a deer down. I'm going to go and I'll be back within the hour, hopefully. I'll come back and find you on the dam. Like, try not to wander off too far from here. So I backed my way out, like put him on the dam, backed my way out, drove back, probably ridiculously fast, probably faster than I should have, back to the house. I get there and they're like, oh, yeah, we don't really want to hop up. It's a bit wet. I'm like, you fucking kidding me? Like, I'm pretty sure you do this every single day. Surely you would know that there's going to be dew about in the morning. You can't put some sheets on top of the roof because it's going to be too wet. And so I was there for probably a good 15 minutes or so. And they're like, yeah, anyway, mate, you might as well go back out. I'm like, oh, I could have killed someone. So I made my way back out, walked straight past Scott, and just that stealthy, you know. And so I did a little loop and went for a walk around, started doing all this whistling to try find him, bird calls and stuff. I'm like, where the fuck is he? And then he pops up on top of the dam. So he just kind of located himself in a different position to where I just kind of said, like, go position yourself on the dam. And then I did a loop around the dam, but didn't really see him. I didn't want to walk across the front of the dam and kind of sense it out because that's the space that they would all come in from. And so he kind of caught me up that he could hear them, but he could never actually see them. They just kind of made their way over the ridge and up into the back ridges. And so I was like, look, we can try follow them for a little bit. But by this time it was 8 o'clock or so. And pretty much that was essentially our morning over. I think even with the winds, the way that the winds were going, maybe we kind of made the choice to back out and not follow them because I was like, you know what, someone like Frank the Tank, you don't want to spook with your wind. I'm going to say, I made the call of let's just move out rather than pressuring him because we want to come back and know that he's in the same location. And so I think that was about I feel like that was maybe morning 3, maybe even morning 4. So Saturday being Saturday being hunt day 1, Sunday being day 2. I think that was Tuesday. Tuesday morning. And by this stage, Scott was talking about leaving on Wednesday, which meant we kind of had to have some meat in the freezer by that afternoon. So the game plan then became, look, we're taking out whatever we can come across this afternoon. We're just going to take the rifle out. We'll go for a shot of whatever. and we'll just get you some meat in the freezer. And so essentially we went out that afternoon and we were playing up against the crunchy cornflakes, unfortunately. So it was like every single step was just so painful. And I was like, we are not coming across anything when we're in the thick of this. So we pretty much did like the biggest loop in this range to be able to get around to where we needed to go. And I was like, look, it's just not going the way it needs to. We're going to try and get into this creek where I've seen deer before. It's actually where I shot my very first deer with a bow. I was like, we're going to make our way down into there. And so we're making our way down. Just as we got to the edges of the creek, we heard some pigs. I was like, oh, like I'm going to shoot a pig. But then we just never kind of saw to them. And right as we heard the pigs, we also heard a roar just off to the side of us. So I was like, I'll let the pigs go, I guess. I'll go after the deer. So we went off to the side and found ourselves a little sandy bed, and we sat on the sandy bed and we just started doing some calls back to this boy. And the crazy thing about the whole weekend, every time I would do a stag roar in the morning, the boys would all fire up. Not all the time, but like pretty much most of the time, at least one would fire up off of my stag calls. In the afternoons, they wouldn't fire back, but they were very calm in the afternoons. I'd give hind calls, they'd fire back, but they would never come into the hind calls. And so something that came to fruition over the whole week, it was a very occurring theme, was that every single boy on the block, apart from a satellite stag that was with Frankie Boy, which you'll hear about a little bit in a sec, had literally 2 to 7 deer with them at all points, 2 to 7 hinds with him at all points. And so I've asked and talked to a few different people afterwards, and they're like, yeah, look, it probably is an issue, like having too many hinds in the block, where essentially the guys didn't have to do it hard. They didn't have to go crazy. And it's something that I remember James Doomster saying to me a few years ago, of like trying to clear out the hinds a little bit before the rut, because especially if you know that all the boys are going to be coming to your block, that essentially you want to make it harder for them so they're not just going out to the club and getting every single girl possible. And so that definitely wasn't something that we did this year. And given that it was pretty much the highest amount of hinds that I've ever seen during the rut, and because they didn't have to really fight for it, like they didn't have to work for it, they also didn't have to fight for it, so they weren't really bothering to budge off of any of the calls that I was doing, hind or stag calls. And so we were down in this little sandy valley, and I'm giving some calls to this guy. He's kind of just every once in a while letting off a few calls, but he just wouldn't budge in. And then the old wind switched completely. And this was like a recurring theme. Every bow hunter knows it, but a recurring theme of the whole week, like wind will be wind, right? And it would swap and it would blow on our necks and it would go back the opposite direction. Or it's crazy. Like, at times, I literally felt like I couldn't go anywhere without the wind doing a complete 360 at times. Like it was blowing in every single direction. It's just so frustrating. But at the same time, you just got to play with what you've got. And so this wind started, we're in the base of this valley, base of a ridge valley type thing. And he was essentially, I think, along the side walls of that ridge. And the wind just blew up our neck and was just strong blowing up our neck. So I was like, he's going to go quiet. And he did. And so I was like, look, let's go through the creek. We'll just see if we can find anything in the creek. So we got in and kind of wound about through the creek. There was lots of sign there, especially the piggies. But unfortunately, we didn't come across any pigs and we didn't come across any other deer at all. So it was getting like right down to sunset sort of thing. I think this would probably be about 5:30 sunset, maybe 6:30. And I was like, look, by this time, the wind is absolutely howling. It picked up so much. I was like, look, it's howling. What we'll do is we'll just start to make our way back. Maybe if we can make it across the other ridge where Cecil is, we'll jump over there. But no promises. This might just be the last hunt that we get to go on, like the last little move that we make. And I said, with the wind howling the way it is, we'll have the ability to kind of move reasonably fast here. So and make a fair bit of noise. So don't worry too much about that. I was like, not without reason. Like, make your way through here, but don't be too worried about going terribly slow, essentially is what I was getting at. And so we started making our way through, and the morning before, when we got into the stag that we were on the fence line on sunrise, the one that Scotty had missed, that morning we also saw the pigs. We saw them kind of in this real thick stuff, and I tried to make a little move on them, but the wind swirled once again. They were gonskis. So I was like, I'm just going to kind of maneuver our way back past where I'd seen the stags. Sorry, where I'd seen the pigs. And maybe we'll come across a pig, because that would be incredible. And so we started maneuvering that way. And we got into the little valley as to where the pigs were. And I keep my eyes out down along there. And Scotty by this stage, to be honest, I told him probably a little bit late. I was like, what shoes are you wearing? I told him I called him on his drive down. I was like, what shoes are you wearing? And he's like, oh, I've got my work boots. They're fine. I use them every day. And within the first day of us walking up and down hills, he'd already rubbed a blister, and then he had to kind of manage that all week. And that really slowed down his walking as such over the week, because he'd have to take like a small step on one side and then a long step on the other side. And it was just stuffing with his hips and stuffing with his back and everything else. So, yeah, definitely if you're getting into hunting, or you don't have a decent set of shoes yet, like make sure you pick a set that are going to work well for you when you're at the bush, because you want to have something that is supportive, something that is going to not let you roll your ankle, something that is going to be quiet enough when you're walking around, or at least have the ability to be able to take them off fast if you need to, so you can then stalk in that last little space onto the deer. I personally, and it's probably not something that everyone should do, but I personally wear volleys, and it's because they're flat soled. I've always been pretty flat soled with my feet in general. You can feel the ground underneath you. You can take slower steps and wider steps, essentially is what I'm getting at. And they're high ankled, so they've got somewhat of an ankle support. Now, it's not the case. I wouldn't wear them in like gorge country. I wouldn't wear them to New Zealand, but for what I'm doing up here in Queensland in particular, they work an absolute treat. But yeah, so getting yourself a good set of boots, it really is a game changer for hunting long hours, long days, every single day. It really does make a big difference. So pretty much Scotty was lagging behind a fair bit at this point, and I'm looking for these pigs, and I look up, and it was just like a gleaming light ray from the sun was shining down on this hind. I was like, Scott, it's your deer. I called him on up. I just kind of knelt down and just kept my eyes on her. And it was literally, if she looked at us, she wouldn't have seen us anyway, because the sun was straight in her eyes. So I was like, just make your way up. Like with the wind howling and stuff, he had time. I'm like, all you're going to do. So I just he came up to me. I was like, all you're going to do is move up to this, this like log that was falling down. There was a lantana bush and there was a log. I'm like, you're going to go up and you're going to rest on that log, get into a position that you can rest on that log, and then take your shot. And so it was pretty funny to watch, because when I look at something like that, I'm like, okay, I would maneuver around the bush and use it as my backdrop. But given that it was like the last chance for Scott. So he was like, I'm going to work through this lantana bush somehow to get through to where I need to take the shot. And I think knowing that the sun was directly in her eyes, and that pretty much he could have go away with a lot of movement. If it was me, or if I was up close, I would have just said, like, go around the bush, it's fine. But he was like, I'm not fucking this up. So he's like maneuvered his way through this thickest part of Lantana to try and get his gun rested on the log. And I had to have a little chuckle with myself at that point in time. Like, oh, poor dude. We all get pretty scratched up and whatever. He's rested. He's got his pretty much arranged it for him, and I was at 160, and the tree I think was at 30 meters. So I just sat down, like, you're going to go up to that tree, you got 130-meter shot, you should be able to just go straight on with your crosshairs and take your shot. And he did. He took the shot, and then I made my way out to him, and then I had a quick look through my binos. I was like, dude, there's another deer there. I'm like, may as well shoot it. Like, you've got the chance to shoot too, just go for it. And so he reloaded, he took another shot, and we walked on up. And maybe partially my fault, partially not, but we got up there, and the second deer was actually a fawn, and I really didn't take much time to look at it through the goggles and through the bino. So it was one of those situations where it's unfortunate. It would have still been a suckling fawn. I don't know to what extent that would be, but essentially he got that one down as well. So both deer went to complete butchering process. We've taken as much of the meat as we could from both the animals. And Scotty's first hunting experience was definitely an experience, definitely a journey, and he got to go home. He's taking my sister and their family home 50 odd kilos of meat. So he did an incredibly good trip, like for his very first time to ever be out. And with that, it was a very rewarding process to be able to do that. And I'm excited to kind of hear the stories moving forward and hearing more about like the next part of the process of like the cooking side of it and how much they're enjoying it. If they're not enjoying it, how I can help them to make that better, hopefully. And yeah, it's just kind of a completely different angle to it. In hindsight, I probably wouldn't do it again in the sense of doing it during the rut, being that I'd taken 7 days off to kind of really make this one goal happen for me. And essentially, I had less than half the time available for me to be able to go out and do the task that I had kind of set myself for. If I'd got a deer down on the first day, then I would have been like, hey, yeah, whatever goes. But yeah, in this circumstance, I'd be like, just don't come during April, maybe. I don't know. But so from then on, it was go time for me. So the next morning, Scotty's like, you can go out by yourself, it's fine. So I took my bow out and I went straight for Frank the Tank. And it was a real foggy morning, and the winds were perfect for me to kind of just drop straight into the bowl and go straight at him. And Frankie was going crazy. And so I started making my way right up to him, and I was just getting excited. Like pretty much I mapped out exactly what I had to do, and I started making it happen. I'm constantly focusing on where we're back in where the dam was, where I left Scotty. And so pretty much, if you think about a dam being a circle, the front kind of, I don't know, let's say 80 degrees, 70 degrees of it is open face, and that's where they can all come in from. But just off the side of that is like this big, thick part of bush, and essentially there's like two flats, so one on either side of that, on that big strip of bushery essentially. And so I'm on the right hand side, he's on the left hand side, and it sounds like he's literally on the other side of the flat. So I've got a fair bit of wiggle room. I'm going to get into this thick stuff in the middle, and I'm going to be able to call across to him, and that was going to be my game plan. So I'm making my way up. I'm starting to get into where he like into that thick stuff, and just as I step into the thick stuff, something busts out in front of me. I was like, what the heck is that? And it was a freaking satellite stag. And this satellite stag would have been at most maybe 100 meters from Frankie, maybe a little bit more. And it was just sitting there watching him. And I did not even see him at all. Like you'd think that being a big old stag, you'd see it right there. But given that it was foggy, given that I was just walking straight to Frank, it just up and ran. He ran around me, tried to get my wind. He just started honking. I'm like, this is horrible. Like you just fucked up the whole morning. And it was one of those, it was the first like, shit, he stuffed up here moments. Like, no, that had kind of happened already. Like there was definitely a lot of high emotions and frustrations already, but at the same time, that's all part of hunting. I'm like, hey, it's going to keep coming. Like, keep copying punches, but let's make it happen. So he sat there for ages. I'm just filming him and stuff. I'm like, come on, dude, move on, like go away. And Frank, by the end of it, probably after 5 minutes, this guy's still honking a little bit, and Frank just starts roaring, and he's like, I don't care. He's like, I know you're there, old satellite stag. Don't try to scare me out of my girls. And so he starts roaring again, and then eventually this boy just walks off. So I start making my way over towards where Frankie is, and really my game plan in my head was still the same. What I should have done at that point in time is started really trying to do some bino looking as much as possible, because Frank had moved from one side of the flats over to the other side of the flats, given that there was the deer honking. So he'd come over for a closer inspection, but I hadn't really realized that had happened. So I started walking, and I get on the edge of the thick stuff. I'm just trying to find my way through as to where I'm going to go through the thick stuff. And just as I stepped out into this little clearing that I was about to walk through, on the other end of the clearing, essentially is where Frank the Tank is. And he's looking at me straight to the trees, and just boom, straight away, big old bark. I'm like, no, like you idiot. Of course he's moved to come and have a closer look. Like, why would he not? And once again, it's foggy out. So literally where he was 30 meters away from me was pretty dense fog. And so you could make out like the silhouette essentially is what it was. He wouldn't have really been able to see me. He would have seen movement. That was kind of it. So he went and did this big loop. Like he probably went out to like 400 or 500 meters, and then he came all the way back into 60. I'm like, hold up, I might actually get a shot here. I'm trying to do a little bits of filming and whatever else. And really probably what I should have done is just had an arrow knocked and just been ready for him to come all the way in. I'm kneeling, I'm behind a tree, I've got a backdrop, and he's coming all the way in. He gets to 67 meters. And then I I made a movement to clip my bow in, and that was enough for him to be like, no, there's something there, and just ran off. He didn't ever win me. He just kind of made noises and ran off. I was like, ah, damn it. So it was actually over really, really fast, and stupidly to me, because I essentially just got very excited and rushed the process. And so, yeah, I guess that's a learning in itself, right? Like, just because they're roaring doesn't mean they're any different. They're still very aware. They're still very alert. And I honestly thought it was going to be the girls. Like, that in my head going into the rut, I was like, it's going to be the girls that give me up, not the satellite stags. Like, I never would have thought it would be a satellite stag that would mess up my hunts. And so, yeah, when that happened, I was like, you idiot, of course, you gotta look out for the satellite stags as well. Like, that's a big part of it. And so that pretty much ruined that morning. I went out again, like went off to another space, but I can't even remember what happened. Might have even been the same morning that I got into Cecil, because I went over to Cecil, and this is another really cool experience. So this is back on Wattle Hill. Now, remembering they've knocked over a whole heap of wattle trees, but they haven't actually dozed them up yet. So this hillside is like absolute hell to try to walk through. And so I'm walking in to where Cecil is, and pretty much he's in one of the bowl faces, and the winds are blowing across. So if I step into the bowl, it's going to blow across the face, and he'll probably win me. So I'm going to have to make a big maneuver around. But what I wanted to do first was just kind of peer over the top and be able to see where Cecil was, because I knew he was in that bowl, but I had no idea where he was. So I got to this bushes and I tried to see where he is. I'm giving roars and giving hind calls, and he's giving me a call back every once in a while, but he was just low, like he was just bedded, and I couldn't actually see him for where he was. I'm like, okay, I know roughly he's around where this tree is. I'm just going to make that my point that I'm going to, and that will be my go-to. So I back out from the top of the bowl. I make my way down to the bottom of the ridge, walk all the way along the ridge, and then walk back up. So I'm pretty much coming in directly on top of him. And this is where it gets really thick with all the wattle. So I pretty much spent like 2 hours trying to get in on top of Cecil, and found like every step you just had to be so cautious. And at times I'm like literally threading my feet through, like, I don't know, like through so much tree fall. Like, you think about the thinnest parts of a tree and it's all on the ground, and you got to try to step over that and trying to find the clearest path, but still it just wouldn't work. Sometimes having to step on like the thicker parts of the log, sometimes hoping that it won't move the tree too much, just really trying to do whatever I can to best get into this great position. And I finally get there, giving hind calls as I'm going in to try and, like, if he hears my steps, maybe it will just kind of not make him as worried. He just gives me calls every once in a while. He actually really wasn't even calling to me that much. He would call a lot. There was a stag on the opposing ridge, and he was calling to that stag more than he would ever call to any hind calls. So pretty much I get in 35 meters off of him. He's in this pretty much this massive lantana bush and a big gum tree, and he's just at the base of that. And I think it's just him to start with. I'm just like sitting there, I'm like, cool, must just be him. Like, I don't know what's going on. Don't know why he's not coming to me. I'm like, do I give a stag call? Do I not? I'm like, maybe a bit too close. It's going to maybe spook him. Got winds directly in my face. I'm like, this is perfect. You know what? Let's just sit it out or wait it, and we'll see what happens. So ranging like the spaces around this tree and kind of figure out all my points. And all of a sudden the deer hops up and walks, and it's actually not him, because I can see his tips through I can see the tips of his antlers through the lantana bush. So this hind walks around, and then another hind walks around. I'm like, this is my shot. This is where he comes out. Now, where I am up on the hill, I'm still actually in direct sunlight, but there's enough kind of fall all around me that it almost makes me not stand out like a sore thumb. And so I'm just kind of standing there, or sitting there on this rock cliff, or smooth rock edge, I'd say, looking down at them. I'm like, okay, it's a 35-meter shot. I'm going to, like, if he comes around this part here where they're going, so they've pretty much done a loop around the lantana bush that he's in. If he comes around, that's going to give me my shot that I can go. And they've walked up and on top, and I've never seen anything like it. This deer, this red deer hind, she literally just got into this position above this lantana bush and just like side flopped into this lantana bush just to like make her bed. It was the most bizarre thing, but yeah, complete like bomb dive into this lantana bush and just laid there. I'm like, okay, no, they're getting comfortable. So I'm like, there's a potential I'm going to be here for a long time. So I just started to get comfortable, started to sit down. I'm just ranging once again, making sure that everything that I've got is really, really fine. I could have shot his hinds so many times. Like, they were just sitting, one of them in particular, she'd hop up and she'd move around. She'd come into like 25 meters, and then she'd walk back out, and then she'd come in again, she'd walk back out. I'm like, come on, just follow them, Frank. Oh, sorry, Cecil, get up and follow them. This is when I first noticed how impressive. No, it was actually the day before I noticed how impressive Cecil was, because we went and made a move on him when Scotty was there, and we found him in not this bowl, but the next bowl. He was bedded. And the hinds hopped up as we came into the bowl, and they moved off. And I was like, wow, he's actually a very impressive boy. And we made a move on him, but we got winded. So we left him for a few days. This is a few days later, I've come back in on him. And this is the first time I've been able to actually see. So he was a 6x7, and just very, very like symmetrical, apart from obviously the one extra little tine he had on the top. But actually a very nice deer. And it's funny that given the size of that spiker that I saw him next to start with, I'd just kind of written him off. Whereas realistically, it's like, no, the spiker was actually incredible. That was the difference there. So I'm sitting there. It's 45 minutes to an hour of sitting there, and then the winds swirled, and I felt them just change slightly on the back of my neck. And I was like, I think I'm high enough to make this not a big problem. And then they all hopped up and they ran like 10 meters down the hill, and they stopped, and then they just kind of moseyed off slowly from there. I was like, no. And I hadn't really ranged down there that far, but I think he kind of stopped at 50 meters. I wasn't willing just to take a willy-nilly shot, especially when he's kind of somewhat alert that there's something out and about. And I was like, it's all right, we're going to catch up later, Cecil. So they ran off, and I tried to maneuver around the hill a little bit to see if I could find them. And unfortunately, I just never came back into contact with them on that day. So that was kind of that hunt over. The next day I went out, and it was absolutely bucketing rain. And I made a move on Frank the Tank. I went into where I'd kind of last seen him, and I'd spooked him off to a little bit. And he was up on a ridge further back from where he had been in this bowl. So this going back into that new country that I was talking about with the newer ridge. It's actually part of the ridge that I hadn't really been on, and I thought he was still inside the bowl. So I've gone into the bowl, and I started making my way back over to it, because he wasn't talking to start with, because it was pissing down rain when I first got out there. So I found some thick cover, and by 6 o'clock, so sun up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, it was still reasonably dark, but he starts roaring. I'm like, okay, cool. This is where I get to make my play on Frankie Boy. I'm like, this is it. We're making this happen. So I made my way up this ridge, started coming down to where I thought he was, and it was actually just like this massive valley in the ridge, and he was on the other side. So I had to completely back my way out, go around, and come back up this hill. And I start making my way up, and I get to this point, and I'm 50 meters off of the hinds, and they can see me directly, like through this little part where I put myself. Essentially what happened is I came into this clearing. It was foggy, and I'm standing just next to this tree, and then the fog cleared off pretty quickly. And all of a sudden, just 50 meters in front of me, across on this other part of the ridge. So like not that far from where I was, but on that other part of the ridge, they were just standing there. And there was one kind of looking at me, and then all of a sudden there were three kind of looking at me. So I had to kind of just really slowly maneuver my way around the tree. And then eventually I was like, they'll move off, and they just didn't. And Frankie Boy's just sitting there roaring his head off again. I'm like, at one point, I actually thought there was two stags, like the way that it sounded in regards to, it sounded like one went off down the bottom of the hill a bit, and one went off up the top of the hill. And I was like, oh, that'd be strange. Like surely they're going to fight or something if that's the case. But eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to lay down and just slide myself backwards off of this ridge that I was on, essentially, so I can walk around them. So I did that. I walked up on top and kind of made my way across them. And I found them. So pretty much pivoted 50 meters, probably a couple 100 meters up the hill, but now I'm 50 meters sidelining them. And I'm like, maybe a little bit further, maybe 100 meters or so. And so I'm like, okay, cool. I just need to get through this part. And there's all these wallabies right ahead of me. I'm like, I'm just going to have to march at them and hope that they maneuver off without spooking the deer. And surely enough, for once, my plan actually worked. And I trekked at these wallabies, and they ran up the hill rather than coming towards me at all, or across towards the deer, which is amazing. So I start making my move in, and I actually get very, very close into the deer. I'm 30 meters from the girl. I can see Frankie Boy with his antlers just kind of up the top of the hill a little bit. I've got the smallest little shooting window. I'm like, that's all I need. And so I'm like, I'm just going to get into a slightly better position if I can just get up. So it was thickish country that I was in, but very hilly, very like a big slope that I was on, to the extent that when I was taking a step, remembering that it's raining, when I was taking a step at times, I would slide back down the hill. So I'm like, okay, just take your time, get into a position here. maybe get on your knees or whatever you need to do, and you'll get a shot eventually. Like he's going to move down. Like he was making his way down through that route anyway. I take this next step, and the wind's blowing up the hill. So I take this next step, and all of a sudden, in like thicker country than I am in, that same satellite stag runs off. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? I'm like, twice in 1 week, bro. Come on. The crazy thing, God, I'm still punching myself about this, kicking myself about this. The crazy thing is that where he was, it wasn't like a general location. Like the first time, that was definitely my stuff up. I should have seen him. The second time, I was like, what are you even doing there? Like literally, he was in like the thickest, weirdest stuff that was definitely not going to get him any punani. That's for sure. The girls weren't going near him, so I don't know what he was doing up there. Had his full creep on, and he just sprinted off up the hill and made such a commotion, being that it was like rocky, slippery, and crunchy. He just maneuvered up and smashed so much stuff on his way up that hill. I'm like, oh no, like that's a dead set giveaway. And the girls just straight away, all of them. So there was actually 6 of them with him. I could only see the 3 to start with, but there was others there. So all 6 of them kind of maneuvered on. And because it's so wet, my binos are foggy, my rangefinder is foggy. It's not working when I click the button to figure out how far they are. So my first guesstimation was 30 meters. I rubbed my screen. I got it clear enough to be able to take a shot, and 30 meters, it was actually spot on. I was like, yes, thank God for playing that game. Guessing the distance, because I do that all the time. And sure enough, pretty much Frank ran out in front of me, stood on the ridge right in my clear view as to where I could take a shot, and let out a roar. And I've picked up my, rather than playing the game, I've picked up my rangefinder to click, and I've clicked and clicked and clicked, and it's not working. And I'm like, shit, put it down. I've looked, I'm like, he's 40, 45 meters. I draw back and Frank runs off. I'm like, no. So I start to make my way through that little bit of thicket. I'm like, just get on the other side and see what's happening. And I actually heard them kind of gallop off by that stage. I'm like, I got through the other side, and to be honest, that was like probably my lowest low. I'd come so far. I was drenched. I was just like absolutely, I felt pretty beat down by this stage. And I sat on the side of the hill and I ate a bar, and I just sat there just thinking about what had happened. And I was like really, what I probably should have done is stopped and taken the shot from, like, just sat where I was and just taken the shot. But with the winds being the way they were, with that stag being where he was, it was going to happen anyway, that he was going to win me eventually. And it was just unfortunate scenario. I was probably with those deer in general for like another hour and a half or so. So it was cool to kind of be in that location so close to them and be in amongst them so much. And really, in regards to my hunt this year, I'm very proud of my efforts of that. Like being able to find the same stags multiple times, being able to target them and hang out with them for many, many hours in close proximity to see what they're doing, see how they're hanging out, see what sort of headgear they've got, what they look like, what they're doing in general. That to me was the most impressive upgrade to my hunting in general compared to where I've been at previously, where everything's kind of almost like a bump and stalk rather than a spot and stalk. No, not actually the case, but it was nice to see how far things had really come, and to be able to actually be there and sit off of them for that long and be in perfect shot opportunity spots if the opportunity was to arise, and it just not come together. I kind of had to, looking back, and give myself a silver lining like that. That was definitely something I was definitely proud of. But at this point I was like, okay, well, I've been away for 6 days. Pretty much I need to take the rifle out to make sure I'm going home with meat. My other cousin had come up for the Easter weekend. And so this is Good Friday morning. I went and did all that. Good Friday afternoon, my cousin's like, hey, can I come out with you? And at this point, I'm a little bit apprehensive. I'm like, do I or don't I? I'm like, I would be absolutely devastated if the very first time I went out there and my cousin's husband was going shooting, if he had not taken me. I was like, no, like, get your ego to the side. Of course, you're going to let him come on out. Like, why would you not? So I paused for probably a second when he asked, and I was like, no, of course, yeah, come with me. And so I took him out that afternoon. I gave him like my khaki shirt to wear, just a work shirt that I had, and he wore his Crocs. So fit straight in with some of the hunting community, that's for sure. And pretty much took the rifle and was like, okay, our focus is we're going to go and hit up Cecil and his girls. So we went over to Wattle Hill. We came in through the bottom side, which is a creek. We came in through the bottom side, and I'm like, look, I'm pretty sure they're going to still be in their beds. So we went into this thick part where the bedding was. And sure enough, we bumped out a hind and her fawn. They ran up the hill and ran off. I was like, bugger, we were close, but we were just too loud. I think also maybe the wind swelled because we weren't being too crazy loud. But they were right in the thickest thick of the thick that they could be in. So we went there and we tried to kind of follow them up a little bit, but they had kind of ducked off. And so we had to make our way up Wattle Hill through the thick stuff. I'm like, dude, we're just going to have to bash through this. So we pretty much were as noisy as you possibly could be walking up this hill with the winds blowing against us, which was good. So I'm like, the sound is going to be limited to some extent. So we got to the top of the hill. I'm like, look, we're going to work our way around this ridge. We'll get to the other side of the ridge. We'll look down as to where I've seen them before. And then if that doesn't work out, we're going to go back to the other side of the property, despite the winds not being great. So we got around to the side. We'd spent probably like the next 20, 30 minutes getting around to the top of this ridge. Only a small ridge, but we were just going slow and we were checking every point that we could. And we got there. I'm like, we're just going to check on this other side. And then we're going back to the other side, dude. Like, we're pretty much done here. When we got over to the other side, and then Cecil starts letting it rip. He's like 10 meters below me. But it's just the thickest bush country and you can't see him. You just hear him literally right there. I'm like, that's him. To my cousin. It was cool. It was really cool because he had never witnessed any of that once again. So I got to take someone else out to kind of witness their very first red stag roar. And he saw it and it was just like, heard it and he was just like blown away. And so we made our way back along the ridge because of the way that our wind was blowing. We were actually very lucky. It was blowing straight over the top of him. So he wasn't going to hear us at all. Sorry, it wasn't going to smell us at all. But it was very risky as to where we were. I'm like, we need to get out and go around and try to drop back in on him and come across the mountain. And so we did that and we're making our move in. And as I'm moving in, I see the bush moving up and down. So once again, I've got the rifle at this point, and they're probably 50 meters away. And I looked through my scope to see what's going on. And it's the first bad genetic deer that I saw all week. It was a button spiker. I was like, what are you doing here, bro? You don't have the authority to be here now, I don't know. I've looked and he's scratching in between his antlers, just up and down this little tree. And essentially there was another, like a thicker tree completely across his vitals. Like he's facing front onto me. I could just see his head moving up and down. Being that I was still out 50 meters or whatever, I'm like, and never really shooting that much. I'm like, I'm not confident to take a headshot, especially with my cousin being there for the first time. If that went bad, like that's just going to completely turn him off of ever wanting to come hunting again. So I'm like, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to wait for a really good shot opportunity here and I'll take this button spiker out. And pretty much started moving a little bit closer because I'm like, if I can get it up here a little bit more, essentially along the game trail, he's going to maneuver off maybe either towards us or off the other way and I'll be able to get a shot. So I start moving up. And sure enough, I'm in completely open space and he starts moving off and I don't have a shot. And I'm like, God damn it. So I keep following him around. And the further I have to follow him around, the more I start to realize that the wind is getting worse and worse and worse and gone. They ran on off and there was actually, so by this time, Cecil's all the way around the other side. He's not got anything to do with the deer that are right there. There's a spiker and there's this little button stag and then Cecil's on the other side. So they got wind and they just took off and I like tried to get a shot, like tried to get in a position that I get a shot off and there was just nothing. I'm like, God damn it. It was just the way it kept playing out. But in the same sense, it was exciting for my cousin. I was like, pretty cool, right? Like that's what hunting is. And so in that space of a couple of hours, he got to see some hinds, he got to see some stags. And it just didn't work out the way that I wanted it to as such, because I wanted to go back out bow hunting that next morning. And so at the same time, though, I'm very happy that I didn't take a shot that I wasn't comfortable with. Looking back in hindsight on that night, I'm like, I should have taken that shot. But looking at it now, I'm like, no, you did the best thing that you could have with what you kind of got dealt. So I was happy with that. And so the next morning, I'm like, you've got one last shot. You're going to go out and you're going to go home with meat. Like that was always the plan. Like first and foremost, I've always been a hunter for meat. And this was kind of the first time that I was really targeting a big boy stag, essentially. I've never actually shot a stag with a rifle. Like, it's not a bad thing if you go and shoot a stag with a rifle. Like, in my head, I'd kind of built it up to be like, it has to be bow or nothing. So I'm like, I'll go out and I'll target one of the big boys. And if it comes into fruition that I can shoot one of the big boys with a rifle, then I'll make it happen. And it'll be great. And I get out there the next morning and it's like the wind gods didn't want that to happen. They're like, no, you don't get to shoot one of these big boys you've been up close and personal with so much time, spent so much time with a rifle. It has to be with the bow. And so the winds were just absolutely chaotic. And pretty much if I went to either of the locations where Cecil or Frank the Tank were, I would have been winded within seconds, or cleared out that whole space. So it pretty much meant that I had one ridge to work on, and that was it. So I made my way up. It was actually way drier than what it had been. It was less, like a lot. It was more. Sorry, it was hotter than what it had been at all. It was like the hottest morning that we'd faced yet. And pretty much I get to this point, and I'm like, this is almost a pointless morning to be out. Like the way the winds were, I'm like, this is just going to be such a tough morning. Then kind of sat down and had some to eat, and then eventually it kind of sorted itself out and became a little bit more consistent. So I was like, okay, I'm going to use this bridge. I'm going to walk along, and I literally walked probably a couple 100 meters, and I came into a hind, and I was like, oh, sick! Like, here's my opportunity. So I went and got set up, and she pretty much gave me, like, it was slightly quartering away, but a really easy shot. She would have been 80 meters, maybe a little bit closer. And so, boom, took my shot. And then a little 5x5 stag ran out, and he just runs out, and he kind of comes right in front of my view. I'm like, do I, don't I? I'm like, no, you've got me. Like, you've got what you want. Let him grow. And so eventually he kind of just moved off. And so I came back. I went and found my hind. I dragged her all the way to where I could get the car to, and I got her home and I started butchering her up. And the coolest thing is that my cousin's wife is vegetarian. And she's like, I'd never eat store-bought meat, but I would eat hunted meat. And so it was cool to kind of see that perspective and see that she was very open to it. And as I got the hind back out to the car space, I started walking down to where the car actually was, and my auntie and uncle and my cousin's wife, they're coming along on the little buggy, and she just starts cheering. She's like, yeah, you got one. Yeah. It was a really cool moment to kind of see someone whose beliefs are to not eat animals to be so excited for someone who is providing for their family and understands exactly why and what I'm doing. To the extent that now my cousin, who's only just moved back to Brisbane area, is like, I actually really want to get into hunting with you. Like, I would love to kind of take that next step, if you're open to having me, which is really cool. So it's yeah, it was just kind of a nice way to end it. And the bizarre thing is that so my other cousin was up from Melbourne. He had some friends there with him, and one of them also was not a meat eater. She was vegetarian, and they all came down and they watched me butcher it. And I explained the process as I was like field dressing this deer, like skinning it. And my cousin was like, can I have the liver? I was like, of course you can. So I gave him the liver, gave him the kidneys. He cooked them all up. I took the heart because it's my favorite, my favorite cut. So yeah, it was kind of a cool process in the sense of like being able to show people you can still forage your own food, and you can still hunt your own food, and you can still provide off of the land if you've got access. And I mean, in New South Wales and stuff, and Victoria, you can get public access too. And I think that's just such a cool point. And I was stoked in the sense that I was coming home with meat, like freezer full of meat. But at the same time, there's like a little part of me that's just like a little hollow, a little bit missing because I didn't complete the task. I'm such a task orientated person. Like, you set me a task, I'll go out and I'll finish the task. And to go and not be able to come home and finish the task, to me, was like a little bit gut wrenching, but it's also just left me like so hungry to get out there again, which is why at the start of the podcast, I'm like, unfortunately, I'm not going to get out again. Because it's just the unfortunate truth. It's just not going to happen, which is a bit sucky. But at the same time, that's just what hunting is. And really, if it was so easy and it did just come together as easily as possible, we probably wouldn't love it as much as what we do. It's not called bow killing. It's called bow hunting, and that's all for a reason. And I've had a bit of time to kind of be with my thoughts and whatever since last week. So given that it's almost been a complete week since I was on the hunt. So it's given me time to actually be very grateful for the opportunity, very grateful for what I've got in general. I was grateful to be able to go away for a week and leave my wife with the young kids. Like there was a lot that kind of had to go to plan for me to be able to even go away on the trip. To be honest, like if you'd asked me probably 3 weeks out from the trip, I would have told you I wasn't going, because there was just so much shit that had happened in life that was just making it really, really hard to see that the trip was going to go ahead. And so when it did, honestly, the very first day that I got out and I went for a walk, my head just felt so clear, like just to get that clarity back and just to get that like moment of like relief from all the shit that had been happening. And to be honest, I've come back into work this week and I've just been so damn good at my job in the sense of like clients like, wow, it feels like everything's just like so much better. I've had quite a few different comments of like, wow, dude, you're crushing it this week, which is really cool. So I think there's also so much to hunting that doesn't get shown, right? Like the mental clarity side of it, the adventure side of it, kind of preaching to the converted here, I know, but something I did on my stories on my own personal account just last night, I actually just shared a little bit about the hunt and a little bit about red deer and a little bit about what I kind of went through over the last week. And I've had so many people reach out like, mad respect for what you do. Like, this is so cool. Thanks for sharing. Like, oh my God, I never knew it was this hard. Like, it's incredible to kind of see it laid out like this. And to be able to show them that side of it was really cool. And also to have the appreciation from so many people, and so many people like, I would much rather see this than a truck full of squished, like chickens squished into a truck or something like that. Like this is amazing. Good on you, dude. So that side of it, I think, and it wasn't showing graphic photos. It wasn't showing anything like that. I did show the dead hind, but I covered up all the blood on her with the messaging that I put on it. And I showed the actual, I showed her scum out and explained that this is part of the butchering process, and I explained that the butchering is something that I had to learn from YouTube, and it's something that I kind of taught myself how to do because of that, and that now we're able to provide delicious meals. And I kind of ended the post by showing some pictures of the meals that we've been providing the family with, and all in all, it was actually like an incredible response. And I think realistically, there's a guy that reached out to me when I started my rut hunt, and I must admit I've been a little bit vacant on my socials over the last few weeks in regards to the hunt, because I was just like so focused, and I worked my ass off every day. Like I'd go out, pop up 4:30, be out hunting by 10 to 5, be back by maybe like 10:30, cook some breakfast, go out and cook, do work all day for my auntie and uncle. Look, and it was like usually 3 o'clock. I'm like, oh my God, I need to get back in and get changed, run in, quickly eat some lunch, and then bail out for a hunt, and then go until 6:30, 7 o'clock, make our way back, make some dinner, have a few drinks or something like that, and hang out with my family, and then pretty much pack it up and do it all again the next day. So it was like, it wasn't like it was a lot of chilling out. So yeah, if you did message me during that time, I'm sorry. But essentially what happened was someone had listened to a podcast that I'd done. I think it was the one with Summers, and they said, thank you for like essentially showing the light that we should be sharing hunting in. Like they had never really thought much about the gore side of it or anything like that. But when we take pictures and share it on our social media, if it is a big bloody animal, then you do just look like another hunter, the way that hunters are described, right? You're just another barbaric man or barbaric woman that just likes to be out and be amongst all the blood and guts and gore, versus when you do it in a slightly more thoughtful way, you talk more about the meat and the eating side, the benefit side of it. It really is kind of more, what's the best way to say it? It's better received, I think. And so yeah, I guess in that sense, like it was actually, I think it's Adam Price, good on you, dude, for making the shift. He went in, he changed his whole Instagram around, he deleted all the photos that he thought was not great for the for the non-hunters or for people that don't hunt in general, he's like, it wouldn't be great for them to see this because they would see it and just be like, yuck, like, oh my God, like it's almost too gory. So he went in and he deleted all that stuff and cleaned up his page. And I have mad respect for that. I really think in that sense, like, yeah, hat goes off to him because he's done such an incredible job of cleaning it up and making it more along the routes of like, well, if someone that was a non-hunter came to my page, would they report it? Like, would it be something that they're like, yuck, this is too gory, this is too whatever it is, like, and try to get you censored on Instagram or not. So yeah, hat goes off to you, dude. And I think realistically, as a hunting community, if you're going to be posting on social media, it is part of your responsibility to make sure that you're doing something similar with that. I'm not to say that grip and grin photos are not allowed or anything like that. Like I'm actually all for it, but at the same time, I think we do have a responsibility to make sure that we're putting out a positive message. So yeah, that's about it from me. I didn't think I'd talk for this long. I didn't think I'd ramble. Sorry. Hopefully it was good listening. But yeah, so pretty much my big learnings. Glass the heck more. Look out for the damn satellite stags. Also, what else was there? There's a fair few good ones I had. Wind is always going to be the wind. It's unfortunate. It's just the way that it is. Too many hinds being a thing. I think that's another thing that I kind of really took away from this rut. I'm like, next year, like maybe in the lead up to it, from December onwards, I might try to target the hinds a bit more. It's hard though, because that's obviously when they're dropping the fawns. So it's like, what do you do there? But yeah, I think that's kind of like the biggest things for me. Like, what was crazy to me is that I don't know if they hadn't started mating maybe yet or what the deal was. I'm sure they were. But essentially for them to not be coming into calls, like, it was just a bit of a game changer to me. It was actually when I went to the dog and gun event before the rut, Harry was like, Harry Watson, when I go out, I'll usually try to be quiet as possible. And sometimes I'll call them in stuff, but if they don't know I'm there, the better. So pretty much I started doing calls through the start of the week. It wasn't working the way that it used to work or it's worked previously. So I went back to just being quiet and just using them, like maybe a roar to locate. And then from there, it was just moving in on them while they were making their noise. And that was kind of my game plan this year, because I had to pivot based on what was working previously and not working this time around. So yeah, hopefully this has been pretty insightful for someone. Hopefully you guys had a better outcome to your rut. I've really loved everyone sharing their picks and stuff with me. So thank you and congratulations to everyone who has got either their first deer down or their best deer down to date. Like I think it's just been such a cool experience. Like, we knew the quality of deer were just going to be so good this year, and it's really turned it on for us. It really has. It's been great. So with that, I'm going to love you guys and leave you. Thanks for listening.